Tonight, you'll meet exciting personalities from the nation's front pages on television's award-winning panel show, Front Page Challenge. Now let's meet tonight's inquiring reporters. First, from the Toronto Daily Star, Gordon Sinclair. And from television, the lovely and talented Toby Robbins. Next, the managing editor of Maclean's magazine, Pierre Burton. And finally, the world-famous Washington reporter and foreign correspondent, Miss Marguerite Higgins. Now meet our editor-in-chief on Front Page Challenge, Fred Davis.
While we're on the subject of awards, our guest panelist, Marguerite Higgins, has picked up quite a number of awards as one of the outstanding world reporters. Marguerite, I would think that you belong to a rather exclusive group in that you are a female war correspondent. Does this present any special problems?
I think any of the problems of any minority group.
It didn't bother you being up in the front lines, for example, in Korea and that sort of thing, eh?
Well, there's a very equalizing thing about bullets. No, that wasn't much of a problem in the front lines. It was back with the so-called chivalrous higher brass that it got a little difficult.
I see. Well, we're going to put you to work with the rest of our panel in just a moment, as soon as folks at home and those of you here in our studio audience have had a chance to read this first front page headline, not hedgeline. Then we'll all meet tonight's first front page challenger.
On October 19th, 1957, history was made at the Montreal Forum when Maurice Richard of the Montreal Canadiens scored the famous 500th goal. And here is Rocket Richard in person to stump the panel with his front page headline as tonight's first guest on Front Page Challenge.
Our panel, our first challenger is behind you to avoid recognition. This challenger represents a national story. As always, you have 4 minutes with which to get the event. Let's start round one with Gordon, please.
Well, it was a big national sports affair in Toronto last night. Is this a sporting event?
Yes.
Were you at that dinner?
Yes.
Are you a Canadian?
Yes.
Then we'll have to try and find your sport. Are you in hockey?
Yes.
You're in hockey. Well, that's getting pretty fast. Down you go, Toby.
Oh, you're leading me. Was this, are you currently playing hockey?
No.
Have you played hockey within the last 10 years?
Yes.
Did you play for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
No.
An American team?
No.
Yeah.
That leaves the Montreal Canadiens. You play
Yes.
for them?
Yes.
You were a player and not not on the managerial side, is that correct?
A player, yes.
A player.
Yes.
And have you played within the last 2 years?
Yes.
Are you French Canadian?
Yes.
You're Rocket Richard, perchance?
Oh.
That's what? Wait, excuse me, 500 goals.
I've never...
That isn't the game. You've identified our challenger, Gordon.
We know the story.
It's bound to be the 500th goal.
Oh, I was being technical.
Rocket,
Maurice
what did
Richard
you do
scored
to
his
the accent,
500th
though?
goal.
On October 19th, 1957, at the Montreal Forum, the largest crowd of the season came early to be in on the historic moment when Maurice Richard would score his 500th goal. 15 minutes into the first period, the game between the Montreal Canadiens and the Chicago Blackhawks was scoreless. Ian Cushionen had just been penalized for holding the Rocket, and then the Canadiens' famed power play went into action. Dickie Moore passed to Jean Beliveau near the side of the net. Beliveau whipped it to Richard. The Rocket met it with a slap shot, and it whizzed past Glenn Hall to score. Maurice Richard's 500th goal made hockey history that night at the Montreal Forum, and the Rocket took his place among the greatest athletes of all time. Tonight, Front Page Challenge welcomes in person Maurice Richard.
Maurice, the one thing that all Canadians, I'm convinced the one thing that all Canadians are interested in is how is the leg coming along with that tendon?
Well, I've been asked that question about 1,000 times since yesterday. Well, it's going pretty good, and I've been skating in Montreal every day, and the leg is getting a little bit stronger every day, and I hope that I'll be back playing in about 15 days or 3 weeks from now.
How long will that be that you've been out altogether?
Well, I'm going to be out there for at least 3 months.
3 months altogether. And yet
Yes.
you'll still be pretty high in the scoring.
Well, I'm kind of far behind the other players right now, and I only got 23 points, and the first guy in ahead's got 59. So
But he's on your team.
He's on my team, yes.
And what about Henri? Do you think he'll ever reach 500 goals?
Well, it's a question that's kind of hard to answer. I think Henry is a very good hockey player, and maybe better than me. He's a better skater and a better stick handler, and I think he'll get a lot of goal in our league. But I'm not too sure if he's going to get 500. I mean, if he doesn't get any action, I think he's got a good chance.
Toby, some questions?
Well, I just wondered how long you intend to play hockey. Have you any? Are you just going to keep playing? I mean, or have you any plans?
Well, like I said before, if I don't score a goal for maybe 10 or 15 games, I'm going to think of quitting then. But as long as I'm scoring a goal once in a while, I might as well keep playing.
We met, when I was in the Soviet Union, we met quite a few of the Russian hockey players, and I'm very curious to know, do you consider them really amateurs?
Well, it's hard for me to say if they're amateur or professional. I didn't see any hockey in Russia, and I suppose they must have a lot of good hockey players over there, but I don't think they're amateurs. They must be professional.
Have you had any opportunity to talk with any Russian hockey
No,
players?
I didn't meet any of the Russian players, no. I didn't have the chance in Montreal.
Maurice, have you got control of your temper now?
Well, for the last 2 or 3 years, I think I behaved myself pretty good, and I didn't take too many penalties this year, and I had a good chance for the Lady Bing this year. I only had 2 minutes.
Oh, that'd be unbelievable. You won the Lady Bing.
Did you think that the decree was fair that ruled you out of the league for some time?
When was that?
Oh, Mr. Campbell.
That's 3 or 4 years ago when President Campbell suspended me.
Well, he since called you the greatest greatest player in hockey, and on this show. How do you feel about him personally?
Well, he was always nice for me. He always said a lot of things nice about me, and I met him everywhere I go. I see him, and he's always nice to me. And the time I was suspended, he suspended me. I think I deserve it a little bit. I hit the referee. I'm probably the only guy in the league that hit the referee. Not the referee, I mean the linesman. But I didn't mean to hit the guy like that. I was just turning around, and I think I deserve the penalty. There's no doubt about that.
Mr. Richard, internationally speaking, which country do you think would be the toughest to beat in an international meet? For Canada.
Well, I think Canada will be the toughest team to beat because they...
Well, the toughest team... All right. Well, what would be the next toughest?
Oh, the next will be the Russia, for sure.
Far tougher than... In other words, next to the Canadians, the Russians are the best skaters and the best players in the world?
I would say so, yes.
Where does the United States come in?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen any American team play hockey. It's hard for me to answer that question.
You don't come to Detroit Red Wings.
Well, thank you very much, Morris, for coming to the program tonight, and we wish you a very speedy recovery as far as that injury is concerned.
Thank you very much.
In the fall of 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt defeated Herbert Hoover by a landslide to become 31st President of the United States. Sharing his victory was the woman who has been acclaimed one of America's greatest, most respected First Ladies, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, tonight's second guest on Front Page Challenge.
Once again, panel, we've asked our challenger to stand behind you because of a very definite area of identification. This story is international. We'll start this round, please, with Toby.
Rousing applause. Are you by any chance in the entertainment business? No. Did this particular event have any direct connection with a war?
No.
Was this by any chance an athletic event?
No.
Was it happy?
52, 53.
I
might point out the answer, I think, is yes. We're into an area of opinion again. I might explain that our challenger, because of a possible recognition even of the voice, is trying to disguise it, so perhaps you're having a little
Is
difficulty.
he using was he speaking French?
No, just lowly.
I didn't hear that. I see. Was this an achievement?
Yes.
A personal achievement for yourself?
Yes.
Pierre?
You are a woman, and this is an achievement in the field of politics, perhaps, is it? Is it political in any sense? It is, it is political. Did we establish that it took place in the... is it an international event in the United States? Did we establish that?
We haven't established where it took place.
Did it take place in the United States?
In the United States?
Yes.
It took place in the United States since... Has it taken place since World War II?
No.
Not since World War II. Did it take place between the two world wars?
Yes.
Yes.
In the 1930s?
No.
Yes. In the 1930s?
That voice is very familiar to me. It isn't the voice of Eleanor Roosevelt, is it?
The voice is, we must admit that.
You are Eleanor Roosevelt.
Our challenger is Eleanor Roosevelt, yes?
Well, I'll pass to Margaret Higgins because she's a Washington correspondent.
Well, was the headline the election of your husband to the presidency?
That is part of it. Would you care to be a little more specific, Marguerite?
For the fourth time?
Was it the inauguration day?
Yes.
There were four of them, though.
Yes, that's why we wanted you to
I
pinpoint it.
see.
Which one,
The
Margaret?
first inauguration day.
That's it. FDR becomes 31st President of the United States.
In the fall of 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became 31st President of the United States. On Inauguration Day, the new president took over his country's leadership from Herbert Hoover as America's financial structure tottered on the brink of disaster.
And I am certain that on this day, my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impels. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I am prepared, under my constitutional duty, to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. These measures, or such other measures, as the Congress may build out of its experience and wisdom, I shall seek within my constitutional authority to bring to speedy adoption. But in the event that the Congress shall fail to take one of these two courses, in the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe.
Tonight, Front Page Challenge welcomes Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt.
Mrs. Roosevelt, in the crucial years after your husband's election, you were closely connected with the period prior to the Great World War, the Second World War. In the atmosphere today, do you detect that our world is perhaps again approaching another great conflict, another great disaster?
Well, it certainly is a disquieting atmosphere, but I should hope that we had more warning and perhaps more wisdom than we had then.
From your trip in the Soviet Union, Mrs. Roosevelt, would it be your judgment that the Russian leaders are really restrained from war by any regard or fear that they would get destroyed themselves?
Oh, yes, they're quite as well aware of the destructive power today if there should be any retaliation. And therefore, I think that unless they felt that there could be no retaliation. They will do everything they can to prevent war, and therefore I think a balance of power is the important thing today.
We hear so much that the United States is slipping into a second-rate power, Mrs. Roosevelt. What is your observation on that?
I would not say that at present we were not completely able to retaliate, and I don't think supremacy is what we are looking for. We are looking to keep a balance.
As one of the few women who have been very outstanding in politics, do you find that being a woman makes it harder or easier?
Oh, I don't know. I've never really given it much thought. I think that perhaps being a woman, you must always try to do a little more than a man would think it necessary to do. But I've never had any difficulty because I was a woman.
Mrs. Roosevelt, this is a completely different kind of question, but there's a play opening on Broadway very shortly called Sunrise at Campobello, which deals with your husband's fight with polio. You know the play? Have you read it? Have you had a chance to see it?
I have read the play, and I have met the cast. I did not want to see it because I think I'm perhaps its worst critic, because I will know what really happened, whereas a play must be a good play.
Well, this is fascinating. How close is the play to what really happened?
I think, in fact, it's fairly close.
But of course, in terms of the polio, is it?
Yes.
That is the highlight of the play, as I gather it.
Oh, yes, it only covers the years from the time Franklin was taken ill to his coming back at Madison Square Garden. That's all it covers.
I'm sorry, did they consult you in the casting? Ralph Bellamy, I believe, is playing your husband.
No, I was not. I told them that I was not a good person to consult because I would always see things as they were, you see. And you must look at something you're producing as whether it's a good play or not. And that was Doris Sherry's feeling.
Are you going to be there opening night?
Yes, I will be there on the 30th.
Once the casting was done, have you seen anybody in the role? I mean, visualized?
I haven't seen them acting.
No.
I've met.
Yes.
I've met everyone except the person who plays Louis Howe, because he hadn't yet been chosen when the other actors, when I went to meet the others.
Mrs. Roosevelt, what is the secret of your own personal vitality? You seem to travel all over the world, keep going. In fact, there have been jokes about it, as you know, cartoons and so on. What's the secret of this strength?
I don't know. I imagine they're good ancestors. I don't know what else to say.
Do you have any particular type of diet?
No. Oh, no.
You see, I'm the oldest person on this panel, and I begin to get a little curious myself.
No, I just live.
Would you care to predict as to whom would be the, is it who or whom?
Whom, I think.
Would be the next president of the United States?
No, I would not. I'm no prophet.
Well, Mrs. Roosevelt, if Mr. Nixon were to become president now, what kind of a change would there be in U.S. policy, if any, do you think?
I really am not able to tell. I think Mr. Nixon is a clever man, and I think that I really could not tell you what the changes would be.
What do you think of our Mr. Diefenbaker?
Well, again, I'm not familiar. I haven't met Mr. Diefenbaker, and I'm not familiar with him.
Mrs. Roosevelt, what was the most rewarding moment of your time in Washington?
What
was the most rewarding, the most...
What was the most rewarding thing
yes.
about the time in Washington?
Yes.
Well, I think perhaps the most rewarding thing was when you could be useful in some way.
I was thinking of any outstanding event or a series of events that distinguished that you would say...
In Washington? No.
Well, I meant while your husband was President of the United States.
No, I think that then what happened was what my husband could do. And the things that I think to him were the most rewarding was when he began to feel that the Depression was being met, that the Depression was being conquered. And then perhaps for him, when he really got the feeling that the war was coming to an end. I think those were the two periods which were probably the most...
Mrs. Roosevelt, we've had criticism published in our papers about the enormous, and it seems enormous, bodyguard of the President of the United States, not your husband, but any president. Did he ever resent that?
Well, I imagine that all presidents resent it, but they have nothing to say about it because it is what Congress dictates. And a president's family may say, you are allowed to have protection, but you do not have to have it. And I never had it. My children never had it. But when the time came that their children were being threatened, then sometimes they had it for their children. But the president has no choice. He has to have whatever Congress dictates.
And you, never having had a bodyguard, were you at any time molested?
Oh, never.
I was wondering, you said your children's children were threatened? By who?
They were threatened, yes. But the children, naturally, they were afraid of for their little children because there was no way to protect them.
Conceivably might threaten
Well, I'll give you an instance. One night they called up my son Elliot in Texas and said that someone had overheard in a hotel a conversation in the room next door where they were planning to kidnap the children on the way to school the next day. And that frightened him rather thoroughly, and after that they were taken to school by Secret Service and brought home. But that's the kind of thing that they got worried about, but not the grown-ups, of course.
Mrs. Roosevelt, you're a senior statesman in the Democratic Party.
No, I'm not. I really am.
Well, you're a senior member of the Democratic Party. What I'm interested in finding out is who do you think in the party now is a presidential timber for the next election?
Oh, there are a great many people who might consider the nomination, might be considered for the nomination. But, in fact, there are really quite a number in the Democratic Party. Now, I'm not going to prophesy as to who may be the ones, because I don't know.
Sure. Well, what are your plans now for wandering around the world? Are you still going?
Oh, well, I travel a good deal in winter anyway, you know, because I work for the American Association for the United Nations, and I volunteered for them to organize throughout the country. And so I travel a good deal for them, and I do a great many lectures, and particularly since I came home from the Soviet Union.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Roosevelt. It's been a great honor to have you on our program, and you've been a most charming guest.
Was produced by Jim Guttrow, written by John Aylesworth. Produced for Lever Brothers by the CBC.